Erin was only 12 years old when she learned the cruelest way what it meant to be alone in the world. The loss of her mother had already left a deep mark on her, a void that was never filled. Since then, she lived under the cold care of a father who, unable to cope with his grief, became a distant, harsh, and resentful man. For him, his daughter was a silent burden, a constant reminder of the woman he had lost. The atmosphere at home was one of piercing silence where every simple gesture was fraught with indifference. Erin grew up surrounded by absence, learning early on that he could not expect affection from someone who did not want to offer it. The decision to abandon her didn't come with a warning. It was on a sultry summer day, on a dirt road in rural New Jersey, that fate took its harshest form. Her father parked the car, handed her a bag of old clothes and a piece of bread wrapped in paper, and without looking back, simply told her to get on with it. There was no explanation, no goodbye. The sound of the engine pulling away was etched in her memory like an echo of rejection. Erin remained motionless for minutes, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. Only when silence filled the road did she realize the reality. She was alone, homeless, and directionless. The initial sensation was one of paralysis. Aaron didn't cry immediately. He just stared at the empty horizon, trying to make sense of this abandonment. Only later, as the sky began to darken and the heat gave way to the night's chill, did the tears come. Fear gripped her small body, and the bag of clothes and the piece of bread seemed ridiculous compared to the immensity of her loneliness. She huddled on the shoulder, hugging her knees, feeling the dust of the road cling to her sweaty skin. With each snap of a twig or a cricket closer, her heart raced, imagining something might harm her. More than hunger or cold, it was the certainty of being alone that hurt the most. That first night, Aaron could barely sleep. Her stomach ached, but what bothered her most was the feeling of utter abandonment. She thought about her mother, how different things would have been if she were alive. She thought about her father, trying to understand what she had done so wrong to be discarded like that. A child's mind cannot grasp the complexities of adult resentment, and so, for Erin, the conclusion was clear. She was unlovable. This cruel, silent thought settled in as the hours slowly passed. The next morning, the bright sun brought with it a new dose of despair. Erin didn't know where to go, had no address to look for, nor anyone to turn to. She walked a few meters down the dirt road, but each step seemed to lead nowhere. The piece of bread had already been devoured the night before, and hunger reappeared as a constant threat. The dust from the road rose with every movement, sticking to her face, wet with dried tears. The bag, heavy for her frail arms, was her only material link to the past, old clothes that meant nothing more than memories. It was into this helpless landscape that Eleanor appeared, a simple widow, accustomed to a solitary routine. She was driving home after a visit to the local market. Upon spotting the small, haggard figure at the side of the road, she slowed down. Aaron, huddled in the dust, looked more like a shadow than a child. Eleanor stopped the car a few meters ahead, watched for a few seconds, and then got out. She approached, cautiously, fearful of frightening the girl, but at the same time overcome by an instinctive urge to protect her. The first contact between the two was silent. Eleanor didn't ask any questions right away. She simply pulled a bottle of water from her bag and offered it to him. Aaron hesitated, suspicious, but thirst prevailed. He drank greedily, tears welling up in his tired eyes. Eleanor then asked her name in a low, almost maternal voice. "Aaron," the girl replied without looking up. In that instant that Eleanor realized, this child wasn't just someone lost on the road. She was someone broken inside. And, unexpectedly, She felt she couldn't leave her there. Without much thought to the consequences, Eleanor decided to take Aaron with her. She opened the car door and made a simple gesture with her hand, inviting her in. Aaron hesitated again, torn between fear and the desire to survive. For a few seconds, she stood, staring at the car seat as if it were an unknown abyss. But then, overcome by exhaustion and the need for safety, she got in. She sat silently, clutching her bag tightly as if it were her only shield. Eleanor started the engine and, with a serene look in her eyes, said simply, "You're safe now." Eleanor's home was modest, situated on a small property far from the city. She had lived there alone since her husband's death years before. The simple space, with antique furniture and walls painted a yellowed white, was nevertheless welcoming. Upon arrival, Eleanor prepared a quick meal, hot soup and fresh bread. For Aaron, it was like sampling a feast. He ate slowly at first, hesitantly, but soon gave in to his appetite. Eleanor watched silently, not wanting to pressure, but already feeling an unexpected affection for this girl growing within her. That night, Aaron slept in a real bed for the first time since his abandonment. The room was small but cozy, with clean sheets that smelled of soap. His body, finally at rest, drifted off into a deep, but his dreams were confused, filled with memories of his father and the road. Eleanor, on the other side of the door, lay awake for hours, reflecting on what had happened. She knew that taking Aaron in would not be easy, but in her heart, she had already made a decision. She would not allow that child to be returned to abandonment. Over the next few days, Aaron began to adjust to the new routine. Still suspicious, she spoke little, but little by little she realized that Eleanor's gestures were different from anything she'd experienced at home. The woman invited her to eat, asked if she was comfortable, offered small gestures without expecting anything in return. To Aaron, these details were strange, almost disconcerting. She was used to feeling invisible, and now it was as if someone finally saw her. With every smile, every dish placed before her, a new spark of confidence emerged within her. Eleanor, in turn, felt rejuvenated by Aaron's presence. The loneliness that once marked her days seemed to have been replaced by purpose. Caring for that girl wasn't just an act of kindness, it was also a way to fill her own emptiness. She began to organize her life differently, thinking about school, clothes, and the future. Even though they weren't blood ties, she felt a mother-daughter bond blossoming within her. She knew the outside world might question her decision, but deep down, there was no doubt. Aaron was a part of her life. The bond between them began to solidify naturally, without speeches or promises. It was at breakfast, when Aaron sat at the table without being reprimanded, that she began to believe she deserved to be there. It was on the nights when Eleanor covered him with an extra blanket that the sense of belonging grew. Small gestures, almost invisible to others, were enormous to a child who had known only rejection. Thus, what began as a chance encounter on a dirt road slowly transformed into something much greater: the building of a new family. As the weeks passed, Aaron began attending the local school, driven by Eleanor, who worked hard to ensure the girl had a modicum of normalcy. The first day was difficult. Her classmates noticed her withdrawn manner, her simple clothes, and her silence fraught with insecurity. Aaron avoided contact, sat in the back of the class, and rarely raised his hand. But Eleanor persisted, telling her every morning, "You have as much right to learn as any of them." These simple words acted as anchors that helped Aaron navigate childhood hostility and his own shame. Despite the support at home, the adjustment wasn't immediate. Aaron often returned crying, saying he didn't want to study anymore. Eleanor patiently welcomed her with hugs and words of encouragement, preparing hot chocolate to warm not only her body but also her soul. Gradually, this repeated care began to convince Aaron that there was someone truly by his side. This consistency, something he had never experienced before, was the first real foundation of his self-confidence. Over time, teachers began to notice Aaron's quiet dedication. Although she wasn't the most talkative, she was observant, copying every word from the board and keeping impeccable notebooks. The girl's intelligence drew attention, and some teachers even praised her ability to learn quickly. When Eleanor received these comments, her eyes filled with pride, as if each of her daughter's achievements were also her own personal victory. She made a point of celebrating every progress, no matter how small, so that Aaron knew she was being seen and valued. While Aaron was finding his place at school, Eleanor faced a different kind of battle. Social workers began to question the girl's presence in their home. The lack of documentation, the fact that they weren't related, and Eleanor's advanced age were seen as obstacles. During some visits, the workers' tone was cold and bureaucratic, as if Aaron were just a number in a file. Eleanor, however, remained firm. She responded calmly, showed the girl's routine, and above all, reinforced the emotional bond that already existed between them. These visits left Aaron with a constant fear of being taken from the home she was beginning to love. Every time someone from outside arrived, she clung to Eleanor's skirts, fearing being taken back to the void of abandonment. Eleanor sensed this panic and made a point of assuring her, "You're not going anywhere, I promise." Even without legal guarantees yet, she repeated this phrase until Aaron believed her. It was a silent pact between them, sustained more by faith than reality. It was in this context that Martin, an idealistic lawyer Eleanor met through a friend from church, emerged. Upon hearing her story, he was immediately touched. Unlike social workers, Martin saw something genuine in the relationship and decided to help. He offered his services almost symbolically, driven more by conviction than profit. For Eleanor, it was like finding an unexpected ally in a seemingly unwinnable war. For Aaron, it was proof that the world still had people willing to fight for them. Martin began the legal process to formalize the adoption, even though he knew it wouldn't be simple. Eleanor's age and financial situation were frequently used against her. Furthermore, Aaron's biological father, though absent, still legally existed, making the situation more complex. Eleanor listened patiently to every detail, but within her, there was only one certainty. She would not let Aaron return to a life of abandonment. This determination, combined with Martin's legal expertise, became the driving force behind the process. The first hearings were tense. Eleanor, accustomed to a simple and reserved life, now found herself facing judges and lawyers who seemed suspicious of her intentions. They questioned her about her income, her health, and even her emotional capacity to care for a child. Every word was a test, but she answered firmly and honestly. Aaron, watching part of the proceedings, watched silently, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. It was difficult to understand the legal proceedings, but he clearly sensed that his new mother was fighting for her. For Aaron, this struggle was transformative. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to face the world for her. She, who had always felt disposable, was now the center of a battle. This realization, even if silent, began to change the way she saw herself. She was no longer just the abandoned girl on the road. She was someone worth defending. This feeling was new, but it gradually took root within her, beginning a process of inner healing. Eleanor was also changing. With each hearing, with each meeting with Martin, she felt strengthened. not only by fighting for Aaron, but by rediscovering within herself the courage she believed she had lost after becoming a widow. It was as if, by defending the girl, she was also defending her own dignity. Her life, previously marked by loneliness, now took on new dimensions. Aaron wasn't just a companion, he was a reason to continue living with purpose. The process dragged on for months, with back and forth documents, questions, and evaluations. But with each step, the bond between Aaron and Eleanor only grew stronger. The fear still lingered, but it no longer outweighed the trust. Aaron clung to the idea that no matter what the law said, there was someone who wouldn't abandon her. Renewed faith began to be reflected in her demeanor. She smiled more, was more willing to participate in school, and was more open with Eleanor. Love, even in the face of uncertainty, was already transforming her. Finally, the day arrived when the judge announced the decision. Aaron would be officially adopted by Eleanor, taking on the Peterson surname. The courtroom seemed ordinary to everyone present, but for Aaron, it was like walking through an invisible door. For the first time, he felt like he had an official home, a full name, and a place to call his own. Eleanor wept quietly, holding her daughter's hand tightly, while Martin smiled with satisfaction, knowing that this moment was more than a legal victory. It was the consecration of a chosen love. Aaron's life changed dramatically after her adoption. The constant fear of being ripped from Eleanor's arms disappeared, and in its place was born a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Having a surname, something seemingly simple, was like an anchor for the girl. Now she was part of something bigger. She began signing Aaron Peterson on all her school notebooks, proudly, as if affirming to herself and the world that she was no longer a forgotten child, but the daughter of someone who chose her. Everyday life at home also took on new meaning. Eleanor, with her almost infinite patience, taught Aaron simple tasks like cooking, gardening, and organizing the home. These were common activities, but they represented much more than practical learning. For Aaron, it was a gesture of inclusion, of being part of a shared life. With each recipe they made together, with each flower planted in the backyard, the conviction grew that this space was indeed their home. Small rituals became fond memories he had previously lacked. At school, the transformation was also evident. Teachers who had previously seen a withdrawn girl began to notice her more active participation. Aaron was no longer afraid to raise his hand, took the risk of answering questions, and even began to make friends. His smile, once rare, began to appear more frequently. Eleanor's presence at school meetings, always attentive and proud, reinforced Aaron's confidence that she was not alone. The simple fact that someone cared about her grades and activities was enough to make her believe in her own potential. Even with progress, it wasn't easy to erase the scars of abandonment. Aaron still had nights when he woke up scared, dreaming of the dirt road and his father's car driving away. At these times, Eleanor would get up, sit beside the bed, and hold the girl's hand until she fell back asleep. She didn't use grand speeches, just her constant presence. Little by little, Aaron realized that, even with painful memories, he no longer needed to face his fears alone. This simple realization was one of the pillars of his emotional recovery. The bond between mother and daughter grew, but it also attracted suspicious glances. Some in the community, preoccupied with prejudice, commented behind her back about Eleanor being too old to raise a child. Others murmured about the fact that they were not related by blood. Aaron overheard some of these comments and felt a pang of shame, but Eleanor always told him, "Family is about those who choose to stay, not those who are just born together." These words became a kind of motto for Aaron, a shield against external judgment. As the years passed, Eleanor's financial situation remained modest, but the home was rich in something no amount of money could buy: affection. Aaron learned to appreciate every gesture, from a simple plate of food to a warm hug at the end of a difficult day. This awareness, even at a young age, shaped her way of seeing the world. Instead of dwelling on what was lacking, she focused on what was abundant: care, security, and true love. This perspective would become a profound mark on her personality. Aaron discovered this passion for learning that, encouraged by Eleanor, she dedicated hours to reading, immersing herself in books borrowed from the town library. Each page turned was an invitation to dream of greater possibilities. Her mother's encouragement was decisive. She always said that education was the key to ensuring Aaron would never again depend on fate or the kindness of others. This simple yet powerful idea fueled the girl's ambition to build a future different from the one imposed upon her at birth. As he matured, Aaron began to reflect on his past more clearly. He could now see that the abandonment had not been his fault, but a cruel choice by someone incapable of love. This understanding didn't erase the pain, but it did release some of the weight he carried. He also realized that Eleanor had no obligation to take her in, but she had done so anyway, and this made the gesture all the more precious. This awareness fueled a deep sense of gratitude, which manifested itself in small acts of retribution in her daily life. Eleanor, for her part, felt that in late motherhood she had found new meaning in her own existence. Each of Aaron's achievements was like a gift life had given her in exchange for years of solitude. She had no material wealth to offer, but she offered what was most essential: presence. This dedication, often invisible to outsiders, was the foundation of Aaron's journey of overcoming adversity. For Eleanor, there was no greater reward than seeing her daughter flourish. The two became inseparable, creating a routine that blended simplicity and love. On Sunday mornings, they would walk together to the local market, where Aaron would learn to choose fruits and vegetables. In the afternoons, they would sit to sew or simply talk. These weren't extraordinary moments, but precisely this normality was extraordinary to Aaron, who once believed he would never have a family. It was in this simplicity that the certainty that they belonged together was cemented. The past, however, still lurked in Aaron's memories. Whenever she saw other children with their biological parents, a part of her wondered what her life would have been like if her mother hadn't died. These reflections brought a mixture of sadness and relief: sadness for what she had lost, relief for what she had found in Eleanor. This internal balance helped her mature faster, developing a deep understanding of the fragility of life and the importance of choices that shape destinies. Amidst this growing up process, Aaron began to harbor a deep desire. He wanted to one day give back to Eleanor for all she had received. He didn't speak of it out loud, but he carried the conviction that he would make his mother proud. This silent commitment became the foundation of his efforts at school, at home, and in all areas of his life. For Aaron, each step forward was also a way of honoring those who believed in him when no one else did. Adolescence brought new challenges for Aaron. Life at school became more complex, marked by peer pressure, social comparisons, and, in some cases, hidden prejudice. She knew her adoption story was being discussed, and she often heard jokes about not being a real daughter. These words hurt, but instead of keeping quiet, she began to rely on Eleanor's firmness to face the teasing. She would return home and vent, always hearing the same response: "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. What makes us a family is love, not paperwork." Conversations were more than comfort. They were life lessons Aaron would carry with him forever. He realized his mother wasn't afraid to expose her weaknesses, talking about loss, aging, and loneliness with ease. This made her understand that there was no such thing as a perfect life, but there was a possible life, built with courage. This vision helped Aaron grow stronger, distance himself from the gaze of others, and focus on his own path. Gradually, he stopped feeling ashamed of his past and began to see it as the source of his resilience. Despite social difficulties, Aaron excelled in her studies. She was a dedicated student, passionate about reading and writing. Teachers began encouraging her to consider an academic future, something that until then had seemed far away. For Eleanor, each piece of advice she received was like an unexpected gift. Seeing her daughter recognized for her intelligence filled her heart with pride. She knew she couldn't offer vast resources, but she could provide the constant encouragement that made all the difference. The bond between the two, already so strong, was further cemented in simple moments. Aaron remembered nights when he would stay up late studying, while Eleanor would sit in the living room, sewing or reading an old book, just for company. There was no pressure, just presence. This kind of gesture showed Aaron that she wasn't alone in her journey. Even without fully understanding, she realized that this partnership was rare, something many people with complete families never experience. As he matured, Aaron also began to notice the weight of time on Eleanor. Her wrinkles deepened, her body showed signs of fatigue, and some tasks were no longer as simple as before. This awakened in the teenager a precocious sense of responsibility. She began helping out more around the house, caring for her mother, and even working odd jobs to help with the expenses. It wasn't an imposed obligation, but a natural choice of gratitude. Aaron knew that everything he had came from this woman's efforts, and he wanted to give back in his own way. This phase was also marked by internal questions. Aaron, silently, still wondered about his biological father and the brother he hadn't seen since the separation. The abandonment had left unanswered questions, and part of her wanted to know what had happened. Eleanor, sensing this conflict, didn't try to hide the truth. She said she didn't know all the details, but that if Aaron ever wanted to look for them, he would be by her side. This honesty further strengthened the trust between them. There were no secrets, only room for future choices. At school, Aaron's dedication finally began to open doors. He received a partial scholarship for a preparatory course. Encouraged by teachers who believed in his talent, Eleanor celebrated as if it were a personal achievement, remembering the shy, scared girl she'd found on the side of the road. For her, seeing Aaron dream big was proof that all the sacrifice had been worth it. Aaron, in turn, dedicated every effort to his mother, silently repeating his promise to never disappoint her. Their relationship began to inspire those around them. Neighbors and acquaintances who had previously grumbled about the age difference and lack of blood ties began to see the couple as an example of courage and affection. Some women in the community even approached Eleanor, seeking advice on motherhood and life. This surprised her, made her proud. She never imagined that her decision to welcome a child could have an impact beyond the walls of her home. Aaron, in the midst of this, cultivated a growing determination within herself. She no longer saw herself as a victim of abandonment, but as a survivor. She understood that her story could be a burden, but she preferred to transform it into fuel. This mindset made her mature for her age, which wasn't always easy, but it prepared her for the challenges of the future. What had once been pain now became motivation to be someone who could help others. Time, however, didn't completely erase the pain of the past. There were days when Aaron remembered the exact moment his father's car drove away and felt the open wound again. In those moments, Eleanor's presence was essential. The adoptive mother didn't try to erase the past, but rather helped her daughter reframe it. You were left behind because he didn't know how to love, not because you didn't deserve love, she always said. This phrase became one of the most important in Aaron's life, a key that helped her maintain her self-esteem even in the face of doubt. As adolescence progressed, Aaron blossomed into a determined young woman, aware of her own history and proud of the family she had built with Eleanor. She was no longer ashamed to say she was adopted. On the contrary, she spoke proudly of how her mother had chosen her when no one else would. This statement, repeated whenever anyone questioned her origins, not only reinforced her identity, but also demonstrated how much she had overcome the shadow of abandonment. This firmer stance didn't eliminate obstacles, but it gave Aaron the courage to face them. And through every challenge, Eleanor was there, not as someone who solved problems for her, but as someone who offered unconditional support. It was this balance between independence and acceptance that allowed Aaron to grow with strong roots and wings ready for the future. The road that had once marked her with pain now seemed distant, replaced by the solid path she was building alongside her mother. When Aaron turned 18, it was a feeling of achievement for both of them. Eleanor clearly remembered the scared girl she had taken in, and now she saw before her a determined young woman, ready to forge her own path. Her high school graduation was one of the most memorable moments. Aaron walked onto the stage to receive her diploma, and from the audience, Eleanor applauded with tears in her eyes. For her, that achievement wasn't just a scholastic certificate, but confirmation that her daughter had overcome the barriers that might have imprisoned her in the past. With her diploma in hand, Aaron decided to pursue her dream of attending college. It wouldn't be easy, as resources were limited, but she won a scholarship that covered part of her expenses. The rest was covered through part-time jobs and hard work. Eleanor, even at her advanced age, made a point of helping out where she could, taking on small sewing jobs for neighbors and even selling homemade bread. Every contribution, no matter how small, was part of a silent pact. Together, they would make it happen. Entering college marked a new stage of maturity for Erin. There, she met young people from different backgrounds, some with comfortable life stories, others with equally difficult paths. This contrast made her appreciate her achievements even more. When she shared part of her story, she sought not pity, but inspiration. Many of her classmates were impressed by her determination and the way she spoke of Eleanor, always emphasizing that her mother was the reason for everything she had achieved. Her chosen major, pedagogy, wasn't a random decision. Erin wanted to be a teacher. She believed that education could change destinies, just as it had changed hers. She felt a genuine calling to work with children, especially those who, like her, carried invisible wounds. Eleanor supported her without hesitation, even knowing that the profession might not be the most lucrative. For her, the most important thing was that her daughter follow her heart and build a purposeful life. During her first years of college, financial challenges were constant. Erin divided her time between studying and temporary jobs, working as a cafeteria server, a school monitor, and occasionally babysitting. The exhaustion was intense, but so was her motivation. Whenever she thought about giving up, she remembered the dirt road where she had been abandoned. She compared that frightened girl with the young woman now attending university and concluded that she couldn't back down. Overcoming obstacles was in every small step. Eleanor, even with her health already failing, made a point of being present for her daughter's every achievement. She saved all her report cards, photographed important moments, and decorated the house with small clippings from local newspapers that mentioned Aaron at academic events. This constant celebration was more than a source of pride. It was proof that they had succeeded together. Aaron, in turn, felt the need to savor every second with his mother, knowing that their time together would not be infinite. It was also in college that Aaron began speaking publicly about her story. In lectures to peers and at community events, she shared what it meant to be abandoned and then welcomed by someone who chose to love her. Her words touched people of all ages, sparking reflections on family, acceptance, and resilience. Although she still bore scars, Aaron already used them as a source of inspiration, transforming pain into learning. Eleanor watched some of these speeches, moved, recognizing in her daughter's words the strength she had once helped cultivate. This process of opening up to the world brought Aaron a new sense of identity. He no longer saw himself simply as a survivor, but as someone capable of inspiring others. He discovered that his story had power, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, and showed that compassion could change lives. This discovery further increased his confidence and reinforced his choice of education as a tool for transformation. If Eleanor had rescued her, now she wanted to rescue other children through knowledge. Despite her achievements, there was one part of her story still unresolved: her brother, Daniel. Aaron thought about him often, imagining what his life would have been like after the separation. His memories were vague, of childhood games interrupted by fights and his father's screams. She didn't know if he was okay, if he had gone another way, or if he too bore the scars of abandonment. This mystery haunted her silently until one unexpected day she received news that would change everything. A college friend who worked at a community center mentioned a young man named Daniel who had shown up there seeking help. Hearing the name and brief description, Aaron's heart raced. He decided to go check it out, unsure of exactly what he would find. When he arrived, he recognized his brother immediately, even after so many years. Daniel was older, his eyes were tired, but there was something unmistakable about him. The reunion, though moving, brought up a mix of difficult feelings. Aaron approached slowly, afraid of scaring him. When she said his name, Daniel stared at her in silence, taking a few seconds to believe it. The embrace that followed was filled with tears and choked words. They stood there, trying to make up for lost years in minutes. For Aaron, that moment was like healing an old wound. He still didn't know what would happen from then on, but his brother's mere presence was a gift that fate had given him. The reunion with Daniel was not only emotional, but also painful. He carried within himself the scars of the same abandonment Aaron had experienced, only in a different form. He had spent more time with his father, suffering his coldness, his outbursts of rage, and finally, being left to fend for himself as a teenager. Daniel was not as fortunate as his sister to be welcomed. He spent years surviving in shelters, temporary jobs, and sometimes sleeping in makeshift shelters. His words were filled with bitterness, but also with a suppressed desire to start over. Aaron listened to each story with a heavy heart, recognizing in her brother the pain she might have felt if Eleanor hadn't come her way. She felt torn between joy at having found him again and sadness for all he had endured. But above all, she felt gratitude. Now she had the chance to offer her brother what she had once received: welcome. This conviction drove her not to look back with resentment, but to see the present as an opportunity for rebuilding. Eleanor welcomed Daniel into her home with the same naturalness she had welcomed Aaron years before. Now elderly, her body more fragile, she opened the door and simply said, "You have a place here too." Daniel, suspicious, was slow to believe her generosity. He wasn't used to being treated kindly, and it made him uncomfortable. But little by little, he began to accept the simple gestures: a plate of food, a clean bed, a non-judgmental conversation. For him, every detail was a new thing, something he seemed to have denied his entire life. The first few months of living together weren't easy. Daniel's personality was hardened by years of neglect. He was suspicious of everyone's intentions and easily angered. Erin patiently tried to get closer, remembering that she herself had initially been wary of Eleanor. The adoptive mother, with her usual serenity, treated the boy unhurriedly, making it clear that there were no demands or conditions. He could simply exist without needing to prove anything. This environment gradually began to crack Daniel's emotional armor. It was during this period that Erin discovered his biological father had died. The news came indirectly through acquaintances. The man, who had once chosen to abandon his children, met a lonely and silent end. For Erin, the news brought mixed feelings. There was no joy nor profound sadness, only the realization that his life had ended as it had, marked by isolation. Daniel, in turn, reacted more harshly, showing anger at never having received even the slightest affection. The emptiness of grief was replaced by anger. Eleanor, once again, was the voice that brought balance. She told them they didn't need to carry the weight of resentment forever, because that would only keep them trapped in the past. She didn't deny the pain they had suffered, but she reminded them that the choice to move forward was in their hands. Erin absorbed these words as he always did, recognizing in them the wisdom of someone who had learned to transform loneliness into love. Daniel resisted more, but over time, he began to see the truth in her vision. The bond between the three grew stronger, albeit with its ups and downs. Erin, now an adult and nearly graduated, made every effort to support her brother in his adjustment. She helped him find courses, small jobs, and even accompanied him to community support sessions. Daniel, though reluctant, accepted the help, gradually recognizing that he didn't have to face everything alone. This process didn't erase the scars, but it created new experiences that served as a foundation for rebuilding his life. In college, Erin also found ways to use her own story as a tool for connection. Many classmates and professors were interested in her reunion with her brother and how she dealt with the pain of the past. Instead of hiding her story, she turned it into an example. This approach led to her being invited to participate in social projects focused on vulnerable children. Erin saw this as a calling to give back to the world a little of what she had received. Eleanor watched with a full heart. She no longer had the energy of youth, but she felt fulfilled. Seeing her children reunited under one roof, even though the journey had been arduous, she knew the time they had left together was precious and kept repeating that the true victory lay in finding each other, despite everything. Erin, hearing this, reinforced to herself that abandonment hadn't defined her destiny, but rather the unexpected love that had emerged on that road years ago. Daniel finally began to recognize in Eleanor the maternal figure he'd been missing. It wasn't immediate, but her gestures gradually won his heart. The fact that a woman without blood ties made room for him, even while carrying so many challenges, made him reflect on the possibility of starting over. He still harbored mistrust, but he was no longer the same hardened young man. Living with him was showing him that family didn't have to be synonymous with pain, and this was a new, almost revolutionary learning experience for him. Each day, the Petersons' simple home became a refuge from the memories of the past. Erin, Daniel, and Eleanor created a routine of complicity, made up of small, everyday victories, meals together, evening conversations, Even everyday arguments helped cement a sense of belonging. It wasn't a traditional family, but it was a real family built on conscious choices. For Aaron, this was the greatest proof that his story wouldn't end in abandonment. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. Eventually, Erin graduated from college and began her career as a teacher. First day in the classroom was unforgettable. Facing a class of restless children, she felt the weight of responsibility and, at the same time, the joy of being exactly where she had dreamed of being. Each student was a reflection of possibilities, and she dedicated herself to seeing beyond appearances, remembering what it was like when no one believed in her. For Erin, teaching wasn't just about imparting knowledge, but about offering children the same chance to be seen that Eleanor had given her. Eleanor closely followed this new phase, even though her health was already fragile. She felt fulfilled seeing her daughter pursue a profession chosen out of passion, not just necessity. For her, each student Erin touched was also a fruit of the love she had planted years before. Often, upon hearing her daughter's stories about the classroom, Eleanor would smile silently, recognizing that her life's mission had extended far beyond the walls of her own home. Daniel was also beginning to forge a more stable path. With Erin and Eleanor's support, he landed a steady job at a mechanic shop and kept himself busy, which helped him move away from the shadows of his past. He still faced moments of anger and insecurity, but he was no longer the suspicious young man who had arrived at the Peterson home. His bond with his sister was strengthening, and although he wasn't the type to openly display his feelings, Daniel made it clear in small gestures how much he valued this new beginning. For Aaron, seeing his brother rebuilding was a shared victory. He remembered how much he had dreamed of seeing him again, and now that he had him back in his life, he felt a part of himself was complete. The house, once marked by absence, now overflowed with presence. Eleanor, even tired, said she had never imagined having children and now had two. This recognition moved Aaron, who understood that his story, once one of loss, had become a legacy. The impact of Erin's journey began to spread beyond the community. Her students, hearing short stories of resilience, took these messages home, and parents began to recognize her as someone who taught much more than just schoolwork. Invitations to speak at local events increased, and Aaron became a respected voice on the importance of care and education. She always made a point of mentioning Eleanor, acknowledging that everything she knew came from that woman's example. Eleanor, for her part, observed everything calmly. She was proud of her daughter, but also recognized that time was taking its toll. Her walks became slower, her health required frequent care, and her days were shorter. Still, she made a point of maintaining an active presence in her children's lives. Even though she couldn't attend every activity, she was always there, ready to listen and offer advice. For Aaron and Daniel, every moment with her was a precious gift. As he matured, Aaron began to reflect more on the cycle of his life. Had been his hardest experience, but also the starting point for his transformation. Without Eleanor, he might not have survived. With her, he had not only survived but flourished. This awareness brought him a mixture of gratitude and responsibility. He knew he needed to honor the story he carried, not only by living well, but also by helping others find paths to hope. Family life, though simple, was full of meaningful moments. They gathered for meals, celebrated small achievements, and even laughed about everyday difficulties. It wasn't a problem-free life, but it was a real life, sustained by affection. Daniel, little by little, found space to open up, sharing stories from his youth and recognizing how much he had been rescued by Eleanor's belated embrace. This exchange of experiences further strengthened their bond. As an adult, Erin realized that the greatest legacy she had received was not material, but emotional. The ability to love without measure, even in the face of the most powerful lesson Eleanor had left. This understanding guided her choices, her relationships, and her teaching. She understood that what truly transforms lives is not perfect conditions, but the presence of someone willing to believe. This was the lesson she carried every day into the classroom and into her life. Eleanor's legacy, though discreet, became increasingly evident. It wasn't known in newspapers or headlines, but it lived on in Aaron's every gesture, and now in Daniel's as well. For both of them, their mother was more than a caregiver. She was the foundation upon which their lives had been rebuilt. Every achievement they achieved, every step forward was also her victory. This awareness drove them both to constantly seek ways to give back, even though they knew they could never return all they had received. As the years passed, the story of Aaron and his family solidified as an example that love can turn even the cruelest situations around. Abandonment wasn't the end, but the beginning of a journey that proved that the strongest bonds aren't born of blood, but of choice. To outsiders, it might have seemed like an ordinary family, but to them, every daily gesture was a silent celebration of victory over rejection. This was the true mark of Erin's resilience. The following years were marked by new achievements for Erin. Now established in her teaching career, she began to be recognized for her dedication to her students and the way she transformed personal stories into inspiration for the classroom. Many students saw in her not only an educator but also a beacon of courage and hope. This recognition didn't distance her from her roots. On the contrary, it further strengthened her bond with Eleanor, who always said, "You are living proof that love changes destinies." Daniel, meanwhile, was making progress in his own reconstruction. He continued working at the workshop and, little by little, achieved financial stability. Although he still faced the ghosts of his past, he found the strength to persevere in his time with his sister and Eleanor. The simplicity of the Peterson home was a safe haven for him, a place where he could finally rest without fear of rejection. The welcome he received transformed him into someone more willing to trust, even if it took him a while to fully open up. Eleanor, already quite old, observed her two children with the calmness of someone who knew she had accomplished her mission. Each of their achievements was a gift to her. She didn't complain about their physical limitations or the increasingly slow routine. On the contrary, she cherished every moment with them. Erin and Daniel reciprocated by caring for her with all the affection possible, knowing that each gesture was a way of thanking them for the unconditional love they had received. The simple home, once marked by loneliness, now brimmed with life and mutual care. Their biological father's past, which had previously loomed like a shadow, no longer occupied a central place in their conversations. Erin and Daniel had learned to accept that they would receive neither answers nor reparations. His solitary death had served as a lesson that resentment builds nothing. Both, influenced by Eleanor's words, chose not to harbor resentment. They preferred to focus their energies on the life they were building, leaving behind what could not be changed. This choice freed them from carrying unnecessary burdens. For Erin, motherhood arrived at a time of full maturity. Married to a partner who shared her values, she had children and found in them a new reason to apply everything she had learned from Eleanor. She raised them with patience, presence, and respect. aware that education was much more than providing. She repeated simple gestures from childhood, preparing home-cooked meals, telling stories before bed, listening attentively. Each act was a way of perpetuating the legacy she had received. Eleanor met Aaron's grandchildren and, although she was already fragile, made a point of being part of their lives. She sat on the porch, watching them play, smiled at their little pranks, and shared memories of her own life. For Aaron, it was moving to see his children living with the grandmother who had changed his destiny. He knew their time together would be brief, but he also understood that every moment was precious and would become a living memory for future generations. Eleanor's aging brought up delicate conversations about the future. Aaron and Daniel, aware of the reality, began to prepare themselves emotionally for the day they would have to move on without her. Eleanor, for her part, spoke about it calmly, emphasizing that they had nothing to fear. They had already learned to walk alone. She said her greatest joy was seeing them overcome the scars of abandonment and transform their pain into strength. This clarity helped her sons face the inevitable with courage. When Eleanor passed away, the farewell was marked by grief, but also by immense gratitude. The entire community attended the funeral, recognizing in her an ordinary woman who had accomplished something extraordinary, changing destinies with a simple gesture of welcome. Aaron and Daniel, hand in hand, remained steadfast, knowing that the best tribute they could pay was to continue living the values she had taught them. Her physical absence was immense, but her emotional presence remained in every decision they made. After the loss, Aaron found strength in his own children and in his work. He realized that his mission now was to multiply what he had received, to prevent Eleanor's story from being erased. He continued teaching, caring for his family, and supporting Daniel, who was still growing stronger on his journey. His mother's memory was in every detail, in the smell of fresh bread, in the care he took in listening to someone, in the courage to welcome them. It was as if Eleanor were still present, guiding his steps. Daniel, in turn, matured even further with his mother's departure. He realized he could no longer postpone life, that he needed to take responsibility and build something solid. Inspired by Aaron and Eleanor's example, he began engaging in community work, offering support to young people facing abandonment or family difficulties. He discovered that by helping others, he also healed himself. This new approach brought him even closer to his sister, creating an unbreakable bond between them. Over time, Aaron became not only a respected teacher, but also a community figure. Her story of overcoming adversity was told in schools, churches, and local gatherings, always emphasizing that it all began with an act of compassion. She never portrayed herself as the sole protagonist. She made a point of highlighting Eleanor as the true heroine. This humility won over even more people and demonstrated that the impact of an act of kindness can span generations. Over the years, realized that Aaron life had given him the mission of being a bridge between a painful past and a hopeful future. In the schools where he worked, he made a point of looking at each student with special attention, identifying in some of their eyes the same loneliness that had once accompanied her. For them, he always had a word of encouragement, a gesture of care, a reminder that no one should feel invisible. Many students over time would recognize that it was precisely this look that helped them not give up. Eleanor's legacy wasn't limited to the intimate confines of her family. It quietly spread throughout the community through Aaron's actions. By teaching, raising her children, and supporting her brother, she kept alive the same principle that once rescued her: unconditional love. This emotional legacy was what truly shaped her path. Whenever anyone asked about her strength, Erin would respond simply, "I learned from my mother that it's not blood that defines us, but the choice to care." Daniel also continued his transformation process. Community work gave him purpose, and over time, he began sharing his own story in conversation circles. Although more reserved than his sister, he told the young people how he had experienced abandonment and pain, but also how he had found a true home in an unexpected place. These often short conversations had a profound impact on those who listened, precisely because of their simplicity and the truth they conveyed. Erin and Daniel together kept Eleanor's memory alive at their family gatherings. On important dates, they recalled stories of their mother, repeated some of her sayings, and maintained simple traditions such as baking fresh bread on Sundays. These rituals were not only a reminder of their mother's existence, but also a reaffirmation of identity. For Erin's children, growing up in this environment, Eleanor was an almost mythical figure, the grandmother who had transformed pain into love, even though she hadn't known them for long. As Erin grew older, he began to reflect more deeply on the path he had traveled. He thought of the dirt road where his life had nearly ended in abandonment, and the simple house where his life had begun again with Eleanor. He recognized that pain had been the starting point, but his destiny had been defined by the love he had received. This perspective brought him peace. There was no way to erase the past, but there was a way to reframe it until it became a source of learning and strength. At public events, Erin always emphasized the importance of small choices. He said that Eleanor didn't have great resources or power, but that her simple gesture of stopping her car and extending her hand had changed everything. This memory served as inspiration for many people, who began to believe that they too could make a difference in someone's life, even if only in small ways. For Erin, this was the true triumph, seeing his family's story inspire other families to embrace acceptance. Reconnecting with the past through Daniel also became a fundamental part of the journey. Although he still carried pain, living with Erin and his family allowed him to experience something he had never fully known: stability. His transformation was not quick, but it was real. He himself recognized that without Eleanor, he would likely have lost himself forever. This recognition kept him connected to the legacy that was now also his. As his grandchildren grew older, Erin realized that the mission of perpetuating Eleanor's story wasn't just his. His children naturally absorbed the values they learned at home: solidarity, empathy, and resilience. Knowing their family's origins made them even more aware of the importance of choosing to love, regardless of biological ties. This continuity was the clearest proof that Eleanor's decision hadn't just saved a girl, but had started a cycle that would span generations. Even in difficult times, Erin found strength in remembering the past. Financial crises, family challenges, professional fatigue, nothing seemed insurmountable compared to what she had already overcome. She always told herself that if she could survive abandonment, she could face any obstacle. This conviction wasn't arrogance, but the fruit of a lifelong experience. It was this confidence that she transmitted to everyone around her, inspiring them not to give up in the face of adversity. The impact of her journey began to extend beyond the community. Stories about her life were featured in local newspapers, and some universities even invited her to share her experience with students. Although she wasn't seeking recognition, Erin accepted the invitations, believing that each opportunity to speak was also a way to honor Eleanor. In each talk, she made a point of repeating that she wasn't the absolute protagonist, but rather the result of an act of love that had changed everything. Daniel, always at his sister's side, participated in some of these events. Although he spoke little, his mere presence was symbolic. Two brothers who had been separated by abandonment, but who reunited and rebuilt together. This image alone was capable of moving entire audiences. For both, it was more than telling a story. It was showing that the past didn't need to dictate the future, that it was possible to break cycles and create new possibilities. Deep down, Aaron recognized that her greatest victory lay not in the applause or external recognition, but in having built a life that could offer others what she herself had barely had: security, affection, and belonging. This realization was what kept her at peace. She knew that abandonment hadn't defined her, but rather the love they chose to give her. And it was this certainty that she wanted to leave as a legacy, not only for her children, but for everyone who crossed her path.